Hello everyone. I wanted to go ahead and share with you how I made my design for my fabric basket that I shared with you. It is basically just a couple of rectangles and some straight lines and then an embroidery design added and a motif line made. What I'm going to do is go ahead and let this stitch out so you can see how it stitches, and I'll explain how it works as it's going along. So let's go ahead and start this. So the first thing I did was created a rectangle that's going to be my placement stitch. This is going to let me know where it is I'm going to place my first piece of fabric, and that first piece of fabric is the middle section of the bag. So after it places this placement stitch down, I'm going to lay my fabric centered over top of this rectangle. You can use spray adhesive if you feel uncomfortable about it moving around. Now the next line that it's stitching is actually the stitching line that is going to stitch that piece of fabric to the stabilizer, so that it won't move for when we go to do the rest of the project. So it's going to stitch all this down into place. Then the next thing is going to be our design element, and I'm going to go ahead and try to speed this up. So it's going to put the design element in. I chose something relatively simple because I didn't want it to overpower the design element of my fabric. Now, if you had a piece of fabric that was solid or very little design element to it, you could go ahead and pick a embroidery design that would be more of a focal point to put here than the simple design that I have chosen to put here. So, think about what kind of fabric choices that you're making and what type of design element you want to be more of your focal point in putting something down here. Then the next thing it's going to do is actually be stitching the top part of the fabric down. So what you'll do is you'll actually go ahead and lay the fabric on top of the center piece of fabric. I'm going to pause this one moment. You're going to lay the top piece of fabric right sides together here with about a ½ inch of it sticking out here beyond this stitching line. And then it's going to go ahead and stitch that fabric to the first piece, and then that will then stay in place. And what I do then is I removed mine from the hoop and folded the fabric from the center over to the right and gave it a nice press. Put it back in the hoop, and then it's going to make a nice little finished stitching line close to the edge here. Now, if you wanted to, instead of making it just a straight stitch, you could make this a motif stitch here if you chose to make it a little fancier design element. Again, that would be a preference as to what your design element's going to be when it's done. Now the line it's stitching here is a stitching line to hold the next piece of fabric in place. So what you'll do is take your fabric for the bottom of your basket, and it gets placed on top, right sides together here, with about a ½ inch sticking out along the edge here. And then it's going to stitch this down into place. And that's going to securely hold that bottom piece of fabric to that middle piece there. Then what you'll do is you'll fold this fabric back from the center over to the left. Again, take it to your ironing board and give it a nice press. Put it back into your hoop, and then I've got it set to do a motif stitch along the edging here. If you didn't want any kind of stitching, don't put this design element in, or pick a different motif, or just, maybe you have a cute little matching border of embroidery design that matches an element here, put that in place here. So that is how that all stitches out. Couple rectangles, a design element here, a couple of lines, and the motif. Let's go ahead and view the grid here. So basically all you want to do is use your line tool under the tools here, and you can start with using the grid as a helpful guide to click here and then say close shape. And if I zoom in some, get this on the screen, you can see it's a little crooked. So you want to do is select the shape and then say edit shape tool, and you can grab these little squares and you can just with your left mouse button grab these, line them up till you get them so that they're nice and make a nice square. And in this properties window here is where you can change the size. So you select absolute, and I unclick this because I want to make it, you know, a particular size. So if I want it 5, well, let me do something that's not going to be too big. Let's do 2 by 3 inches. And then I hit apply. We'll zoom down. Now I've got a rectangle that this size. What I'll do then next is copy and paste this and bring the copied and paste one. Copy it and paste. Hopefully it makes the second one. Let's see here. Oh, I gotta select it here. I'm sorry. Okay, so I've got a second one. This one here then is where you can convert to applique. You can have a satin stitch. You can change that to a motif. And then from this here, you can choose different motifs that you like, hit apply. Or you can make it a run, which is going to be your straight lines. And if you want, you can make it a single or a double run. On my stitching ones, I did a double just to make sure that they were going to be secure. Hit apply. And it's going to make it an applique, which means it's going to end up with 3 layers. On some of this, we're not going to want 3 layers. So we're going to want to convert this to stitches. So you would right click and say preserve as stitches. And then you would get rid of these top 2 here and save this one. But before you ever do that, we're going to go back. We want to keep this one here as an applique. We want to keep this one here as our artwork, because these are completely editable. Once you preserve as stitches, you can no longer edit and change it. So you would want to do this on a blank canvas, save that. You would say File, Save As. You want a BRF file to save it as, because that will make it an editable file. Now when you complete your project, like you've got here, you do not want to save that over your BRF file. You will want to make sure you save that as your PES file, because if you overwrite your BRF, you will overwrite these editable pieces here. Because once this is made a stitch, you cannot edit it. Okay? And what I did for the ends of my basket is I made them narrower and squared off, and I did rotate my design so that it would fit in a smaller hoop, so I can use a smaller hoop and save myself on some stabilizer. And another one I did was made it so that I can have 2 separate side pieces instead of one long rectangle. So maybe I want to have fun with a different piece of fabric here and a different piece of fabric here. So I've got it so it's going to sew 2 different pieces of material together. Now there is something I want to show you here. I'm going to close off some things here. On the piece here, you only want a 3-sided line. You do not want a complete box, because when it stitches this first one here, that's going to stitch down your first piece of fabric. Then you're going to have your stitching line here that's going to hold that second piece in place, or it's going to stitch it to the first piece. So you would have the two pieces of material right sides together. It'll stitch this line here. You'll take the second piece and fold it over to this side, and then that's where this three-sided part of the square comes into place and holds that fabric down before you would then start adding in all of the other pieces like I showed you before, where you're going to have your fabric for the top and your fabric for the bottom. Because if this isn't three-sided, you're going to end up with a top stitch line across the middle of your piece, and then you're not going to want that. So that is basically how I came up with my project. You got to do a little bit of math, and you're going to want to also use your arrange feature here so that you can, select your pieces, multiple pieces, and, then be able to align them to the right and the left. I think I've got this stuff maybe grouped together. No. Okay, so you're going to be able to align your pieces up to make sure everything's in alignment. And when you zoom in, you'll be able to see your stitching lines and things. You're going to want to make sure your placement stitch is out a little further than the stitching line, because you don't want to end up having this show on your finished project on the facing of your fabric. So, that's another thing to be paying attention to, that your stitching lines are and your placement lines are just off a little bit from one another. So I hope that helps, and I'm looking forward to maybe somebody else trying this out and sharing with us what your project looks like. Have a good day. Bye-bye.